What's going on, everyone? So Philadelphia appears to be imploding. Doc Rivers was fired, and I don't think that that is a real shock to anybody. I think that that was kind of the consensus, especially with the way that all these coaches have been fired, and Doc Rivers has really underachieved and just can't get out of the second round no matter who's on Philly, and I think it was just time for him to go. But another thing that has been rumored for some time is James Harden's departure from Philly. There were the reports that he didn't want to play for Doc Rivers. Well, Doc Rivers was fired, and you would think that he would want to stick around now, and it doesn't look like that's going to be the case. James Harden has officially opted out, or he's going to opt out of his $35.6 million contract, and he wants freedom in free agency, which I don't think makes a lot of sense on multiple fronts. One, he might not get that much money anywhere. Even Philly might not even want to give him that much money after the performance that we just saw in Philadelphia. And there have been talks and rumors of him going to other places pretty much all season, and him trying to take his talents or lack thereof someplace else. And this is a real problem if you're Philadelphia, because one, you don't really have a coach. Yes, there are several coaches out there that you could bring in, and maybe they're the ones that'll right the ship, but you're not going to have your second star in James Harden if he leaves. Why would Joel Embiid want to stay in Philadelphia? I mean, if he couldn't win with James Harden and the team he has now, I don't see him winning with the team he has now and without James Harden. There aren't any real top tier blue chip level free agents in free agency. And on top of that, Philly doesn't have a ton of assets to go and acquire another star unless you're giving up a Maxey or something like that, which means you might end up regressing regardless. And so this is a huge problem for Philadelphia, and don't be shocked at all if you see Joel Embiid request a trade, or there are rumors of him potentially requesting a trade in the offseason. It's something that I've talked about on numerous occasions. I said Doc would be gone. I said James Harden would probably be gone, and that's what it's looking like. Now, maybe James Harden resigns. That's a real possibility. Maybe he restructures his contract and takes a lesser amount. We saw him do that so that way they can go get PJ Tucker. So maybe that's part of the plan, and they can go get a couple other pieces to add some depth to this roster, possibly. But I don't know. I really think that James Harden, he wants out. And there's even new reports and rumors that James Harden has interest in joining the Phoenix Suns. Me personally, I don't really buy this, right? Now, look, James Harden left the Nets because of Kyrie. He didn't leave because of Kevin Durant, right? So I could see James Harden wanting to go and play with Kevin Durant, wanting to go play with Devin Booker, but Phoenix doesn't have the money to sign him, so they'd have to work out some type of trade. And the only thing that really makes sense would be Chris Paul. Like, right, they'd trade Chris Paul and get James Harden. But if you're Philly, why would you want to do that unless you're going into a rebuild and you just want some assets and you want to get something for James Harden rather than nothing, and he could just leave in free agency, and maybe he says, like, hey, I'm either going to Houston or trade me to Phoenix and get me whatever you can for me. Right? I mean, that could be a real possibility. I don't really buy the Phoenix rumors, though, if I'm being honest, especially with the way Kevin Durant felt. I don't know if you remember the whole, it was a meme, too, for a while, but the whole draft, all-star draft, and Kevin Durant was next-level petty, and I don't think that that's changed. Now, I mean, look, maybe bygones. They both want to win. Maybe they work it out, but I don't know. I think that this is kind of a long shot, but him going to Houston, I think, is a real possibility. And I've seen a lot of people say, like, why would he want to go to Houston? Why would Houston even want him? And there's a multitude of reasons, right? For him, I mean, he was keen in Houston, right? Houston loved him. The fans loved him. There's no pressure in Houston, right? Because no one's going to expect James Harden and those guys, winning an NBA championship anytime soon. So all the pressure's off, and he could just kind of go there and play his game. And if he leads them to the playoffs, well, then that's a victory in and of itself. And people will praise him and talk about how, he's brought the Rockets back into the playoffs and he's got all this young talent to work with. That, for him, makes a lot of sense, right? Because now he doesn't have to be in that conversation of like, oh, James Harden, once again, underachieved in the playoffs. Oh, James Harden once again didn't show up in the playoffs. And if you're Houston, it makes sense for a multitude of reasons. Again, James Harden was the guy in Houston, right? Many people didn't want to see James Harden leave. You got all this young talent. You got all this cap space, all this money. You bring in a James Harden, and maybe you bring in like a Chris Middleton or something, and now you're like a middle of the pack team in the Western Conference and kind of give fans some hope and excitement. Also, you got him to kind of just help these younger guys develop their game and kind of be a leader in that locker room. I mean, there have been a lot of questions with some of the younger guys in Houston that has led to even speculation about potential trades from even Green, right? So the question is like, does Houston really want James Harden? Another thing that I didn't even add is just ticket sales, right? And merch and all kinds of stuff, right? There's value and from a business sense of bringing back James Harden. But just from all fronts, like, does Houston want to bring in James Harden? Now, there are reports that Houston does, that Houston wants to target some other stars and some other players. And James Harden, maybe he takes, a discount to go bring in somebody else, right? That could be a real possibility. And then Houston has a bunch of young assets that they could then take and maybe go trade and go get somebody else, right? And maybe Houston could go from being this young up-and-coming team to like, oh, they're a legit contender now with a nice mix of youth and veterans, right? Think if they had, let's say they had, again, just throwing stuff out there, but what if they ended up having like James Harden, Damian Lillard, Chris Middleton, Sengun, and, Jabari Smith, right? Like, that's a really good team with a nice mix of young talent and stuff like that. I mean, Houston has a ton of assets that they could use to trade and unload. Again, just throwing out an idea there. Or maybe even it's Trae Young, right? Maybe it's James Harden, Trae Young, Middleton, and Sengun and Jabari, right? That could be something too. So, I mean, Houston definitely, if they can become relevant, they're going to want to become relevant, especially if they can kind of keep their core young guys, like the guys that they really believe in for the future. And still, they'd still have this year's draft pick if they want. Otherwise, they can unload it. There's options and flexibility that Houston has. And if James Harden comes, then maybe you can kind of, entice other guys to come to Houston and sort of build this foundation. But again, if James Harden leaves, which I really do think he very likely might leave, and if he does, I think Philly's done. I think that's it. I think Joel Embiid, if he doesn't do it in the offseason, I think by the trade deadline, he's going to be barely scratching the playoffs, or he's going to have to play in an incredible high level, and he's going to be like, I'm doing this for what? Like, to be a first, second round exit again, to maybe be a play-in team, right? Because, I mean, how good is the current Sixers team if you take off James Harden? Like, James Harden had a good season for them. He was a big factor in their success this year. If you lose him and you don't really have anybody to replace him that's going to give you his level of production, at least in the regular season, does Joel Embiid want to stay on a team just to not be a contender when he could, maybe request a trade? Would Portland, with Damian Lillard, would Portland go and unload some of these guys? Would they unload Sharp in the third pick and go and, and whatever other assets, maybe you get Simons and a couple other things, right? Would they go do that to go get Joel Embiid, right? To pair Embiid with Damian Lillard and try to make a push for a title run before Damian Lillard retires? I mean, that could be a possibility, right? And then they'd have a team of like, Jeremy Grant, maybe you can keep Simons or whatever, or if not, whatever, who cares? But you'd have like Joel Embiid, Jeremy Grant, Damian Lillard. I believe they'd still have some cap space left over, so they could go and go get some other pieces, right? And just kind of mold that team around. Maybe you can unload Nurkic and go get a piece or two. The Knicks, I mean, even the Knicks is somebody that comes to mind, right? The Knicks have a just overflowing pile of assets that they could unload to Philadelphia and put together a grandfather package in order to kind of entice Joel Embiid to come to the Knicks, right? And you'd have Jalen Brunson. I mean, you could still essentially have the same team, right? And just be a better version, right? I just think that we're seeing the end of Philadelphia here, at least the process Philadelphia. I think if James Harden really does leave, I think Joel Embiid is not far behind. I think Joel Embiid ends up following suit, but we'll see. We'll see. Just because he opted out doesn't mean he's fully leaving and he's gone, but it's just like, why? Like, what other team, maybe Houston would do it, but in all honesty, like, what other team is going to pay him $35 million a year? Now, maybe the Suns would in a sign and trade, to go and get off of Chris Paul, but even then, now you're hard capped, so it just, can you fill out the rest of your roster? And do you really want to trust James Harden? I don't see that. I just don't think the Suns make a lot of sense. I think it's very likely Houston, if he wants the max money, or he takes a discount to go to some other team and, be a partial contender, right? Could the Knicks work some money around to maybe go get James Harden? Maybe they could just unload Julius Randle to somebody, right? Something like that and go get James Harden. I don't know. But anyway, as always, this is a discussion, so I pass the question on you. Let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. What do you think? Think James Harden's gone? Think he's not? How do you feel? Whatever your thoughts are, love to hear it. Let me know.